Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for Hell's Kier Extreme. This is the newest Extreme Primal encounter made available by patch 4.4 in Final Fantasy XIV Prelude and Violet. My good friend Simon says that this fight rekindled his love for raiding. I've actually even seen a few party finder groups get really fired up about it. Seems like this fight brings out a burning passion in a lot of people. My name is MTQ and I'll be your Primal guide. You'll notice 4 Phoenix corpses scattered around the inner center of the platform. These corpses will be reborn if they are hit by specific fire attacks. Before you begin, I would advise assigning each corpse to a specific damage dealer. Keep those assignments in mind as we'll go into that very soon. We begin with Screams of the Damned, a raid-wide AoE blast. Shield and heal through this as necessary. About 15 seconds into the fight, Suzaku will fly away and appear somewhere along the outer edge of the platform. She will then dive bomb in a straight line right through it. At the same time, all players will be marked for Rekindle Fire AoE circles. Players will need to spread around the platform, making sure they do not overlap each other or onto any of the Phoenix corpses in the middle, all while staying out of Suzaku's path. Next up, Fleeting Summer is a large frontal cone attack towards a random player. Move out of this as necessary. CREMATE is a heavy-hitting magic tank buster that targets the main tank. Cooldown and heal through this as necessary. When the boss casts Phoenix down, a number of tail feathers and plumes will spawn around the platform in a set pattern and begin a slow cast explosion. The big tail feathers have a crazy amount of health and can be ignored. If the middle tail feather explodes on top of the Phoenix corpses, each Phoenix will respawn with a plus 14 HP buff that basically makes them impossible to kill before they explode for lethal damage and debuffs. To avoid this fiery death, players will destroy each of the smaller plumes as quickly as possible, allowing the formation of safe spots between the large tail feather telegraphs. During this time, each damage dealer will also be targeted for Rekindle Fire AoE circles. These players will move their AoE circle to overlap with their assigned Phoenix corpse. The goal here is to awaken each Phoenix with only one attack so that they spawn with the smallest HP buff possible. When a Phoenix is reborn in this manner, they will tether and fixate to the player that woke them, afflicting them with a fire debuff until they are destroyed. This allows each player to drag the Phoenix out of the center and away from any of the tail feather explosions to avoid getting any extra HP buffs. Once each Phoenix is positioned appropriately in a safe zone, players can then begin to destroy them. If a Phoenix stays alive too long, it'll cast Ashes to Ashes, a massive raid-wide blast that will do high damage, put up stacking separation debuffs on all players, and will probably wipe you. The main tank and healers will also need to watch for another CREMATE during this time. Healing can get a bit intensive here, so keep an eye out on those HP bars. You'll deal with another Screams of the Damned AoE cast, and eventually Suzaku will return to the middle of the platform and cast Eternal Flame. This marks the beginning of the transition phase. 8 circles will spawn around the center of the platform. Have each player stand inside of one. Suzaku will then summon waves of orbs into the center in an attempt to charge up her Scarlet Melody gauge. To avoid this, players will need to position their characters to face the direction of their arrows to block each orb. Doing this correctly will reward the player with a stacking damage up buff and cause the incoming Scarlet Fever attack to do minimal damage. As we enter into phase 3, you'll notice the platform has significantly changed and players now face the danger of falling off the platform on the outer edge or in the very center of the arena, so watch your step. SOUTHRON STAR is a massive raid-wide AoE blast. Be ready to shield and heal through this as necessary. Mesmerizing Melody is a raid-wide pull-in that will drop players through the center of the arena if they are not positioned appropriately. To avoid this attack, use a knockback immunity or run to the outer edge to give yourself the room necessary to avoid getting sucked into that hole. Up next, Well of Flame is a large column AoE attack in the direction of a player. Move out of this as necessary. At the same time, 3 other players will be targeted for Rekindle AoEs. These players will need to spread to avoid overlap. Immediately after, a healer will be targeted for the Scathing Net stack up marker. All players but the main tank should stack to share this incoming damage. Phantom Flurry is a tank buster that will target the main tank for a massive amount of hits and then place a physical vulnerability up debuff on them, forcing a tank swap. As soon as the flurry of attacks finishes on the main tank, Suzaku will then cast a massive 180-degree frontal cone in the direction she's facing. This has no cast bar and all players will need to ensure they're behind the boss during this attack to avoid getting killed by the high damage and knockback. Next up, a Phoenix will spawn either in the north or south of the platform and begin to move clockwise around the arena. You'll notice that the 4 sections of the platform now have specific colors and symbols assigned to them. You should also notice the a sequence of symbols on the outer edges of the arena. When the Phoenix reaches each symbol, the corresponding section of the platform will explode, dealing high damage, knocking up and debuffing any players caught inside. This may look confusing and intimidating at first glance, but you'll soon come to realize that there are only 2 movements of pattern necessary, regardless of what sequence the colors and symbols appear in. The first possible moveset is a very simple merry-go-round. Anytime you see a repeating pattern of colors, you can expect this type of movement. Players will need to identify the first color to explode, then see if the sequence will explode clockwise or counterclockwise and stand on the safe platform right next to it. Once the first color explodes, players will quickly follow the explosion pattern around, being careful to hug the inner edge of the arena without falling off. You'll need to run all the way around and end up on the same section that began that initial explosion circle. The second possible movement set is a bit more complicated, but still very easy once you learn the pattern. This pattern can be easily identified by noticing 2 of the same color symbols right next to each other in the middle of the sequence. To handle this pattern, players will first identify the first color to explode and stand on either platform next to it. They'll then wait for that first platform to explode and then immediately move into it. Then, they'll need to wait for the adjacent platform to explode 2 times before moving into that one safely to dodge the remainder of the sequence. During this time, the boss is constantly auto-attacking the main tank, dealing a fair amount of damage. Tanks and healers beware. Once the Phoenix goes through both sequences, the platform will return to normal. Next, Suzaku will either cast Mesmerizing Melody or Ruthless Refrain. Ruthless Refrain will knock back all players a set distance. To avoid getting thrown off the platform, players will need to use knockback immunities or stand in melee range for the attack. Up next is Close Quarter Crescendo. Each player will be tethered to an orb that has a specific directional arrow associated with it. After a few seconds, the player will then be forced to walk in the direction denoted by that arrow about half the length of the platform. To avoid getting walked right off the platform, players will first identify which direction they are expected to walk in. Then, they'll need to position themselves in such a way to give themselves enough room to avoid falling either into the center of the hole or off the edge of the platform. Next up, Suzaku will return to the center and cast another Well of Flame sequence of AoEs. Handle these in the same manner as before. This is followed by another Tank Buster and Knockback combo. Remember to get behind the boss after that Tank Buster. Up next, another Phoenix Simon Says phase, but this time there's more. The boss will cast either Ruthless Refrain or Mesmerizing Melody as soon as the Phoenix appears, so make sure you're knockback immune or positioned appropriately as you're identifying that first sequence. Handle the first pattern and then be ready to heal through another SOUTHRON Star before the second sequence. After the second sequence is complete, you'll deal with another Tank Buster and another knockback combo. Heal through another SOUTHRON Star and then get ready for Incandescent Interlude. 4 meteor circles will spawn around the platform on the cardinals. You'll need at least 1 person in each to avoid death. Immediately after, the boss will cast Ruthless Refrain and target 4 players with Rekindle AoEs. The 4 players will either be all the damage dealers or the tanks and the healers. To handle this combo, we buddy up each tank and healer with each damage dealer and assign them to specific cardinals to handle a specific meteor. Once the Rekindle AoE group is identified, we have those players without the AoE circles get knocked back into the meteor to eat the meteor. The players with the AoE circles will position themselves to get knocked into the inner cardinal direction to avoid dangerous overlap. Immediately after, all players will move to avoid the Well of Flame column attack. Next up, another Phoenix Says pattern, but this time you'll notice that each sequence only has 4 symbols associated with them. An easy way to dodge correctly here is to stand next to the first platform color to explode and then quickly move into it once it does. The trick here is that players will need to spread Rekindle and dodge Wall of Flame right before the first sequence, so be sure to dodge appropriately. Right before the second sequence, Suzaku will cast Close Quarter Crescendo and all players will be targeted with those directional orbs again. With the timing here, players will be mind controlled roughly around the time the first 2 colors are hit by the Phoenix in the sequence. To handle this appropriately, players will first identify which direction they will be forced to walk in. Then, they will identify the first 2 colors or platforms in the sequence. They want to position their characters to end up on the platform corresponding to either the first or second color in the sequence. Suzaku will return to the center, spawn another set of sequences with 4 runes each, and then cast Ruthless Refrain or Mesmerizing Melody again. Be sure to position yourself in or out to avoid getting knocked off. Immediately after, players can move into the first platform to explode to avoid the remainder of the sequence. Right before the second sequence in this set, players will deal with a Tank Buster. Cooldown, tank swap, and remember to move behind the boss as necessary. Immediately after, players can position themselves next to the first platform that explodes in the sequence, and then move into it to avoid the rest of the platform explosions. At this point, the boss will cycle through SOUTHRON Star, another knockback or pull-in attack, Well of Flames, and the Phantom Flurry Tank Busters a few times before the Enrage sequence begins. In the Enrage sequence, you'll have no safe platforms to stand on and will quickly wipe. If you handle each Phoenix Says phase as correctly as possible and you avoid deaths, you should have no problem defeating her before the Enrage sequence. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.